After a long history of delays, rewrites, and behind-the-scenes fallouts, a film adaptation of the comic book series Watchmen finally looked set to happen towards the very end of 2006. Impressed with his work on 300, the Watchmen rights holders Warner Bros. Tapped Zack Snyder to direct the movie for a 2009 release. Warner wasn't just looking to get their film into production, however, they were also pursuing possible routes to get a video game into development based around the franchise. It would be the first game to ever bear its name, and Warner Bros. Interactive Entertainment was determined to choose the right people for the job. Bottlerocket Entertainment was among the short list of developers they were looking at to make it a reality. Bottlerocket was a company founded by Jonathan Beard, a game industry veteran who'd been active since the 90s when he worked at Ocean Software. One of his breakout projects was The Mark of Kree, an action-adventure game for PS2 that he worked on at Sony San Diego. The game debuted a unique combat system where button prompts would appear above the heads of enemies. You would often fight multiple enemies simultaneously, building up combos and choosing how to disperse each blow, managing the combo between each one of them. The Mark of Kree became a success, but Beard sought more independence from Sony. He left when it was finished, taking a handful of his co-workers from the project with him to form Bottlerocket Entertainment. Sony allowed them to take their patent for the Mark of Kree combat system with them. Bottlerocket worked on a successor to the game in collaboration with Sony in their first years, as well as doing a Xiaolin Showdown tie-in video game that came out in November 2006. After that, work available to the developers dried up somewhat. They began a dialogue with various publishers and license owners in their search to score their next contract. Among these were pitches to Marvel, including an Iron Man video game, a proposal for the rights to Thundercats, and lastly, Watchmen. They had actually already been in talks with Warner Bros. For a while when the opportunity to do Watchmen arose. Bottlerocket had also wanted to do a Batman video game with them for the new systems, the Xbox 360 and PS3, but WB had given the job to Rocksteady Studios, who would go on to make Batman Arkham Asylum. Undeterred by this, Bottlerocket was still hoping to work with them. They started to come up with ideas for how the world of Watchmen would work in the context of a video game. Some of their artists examined the original comic book series for inspiration and began to recreate scenes and images from them, like shots of the comedian's iconic bloodstained badge. Their video game, however, was intended to exist within the same universe of the Zack Snyder version of Watchmen specifically. Through Warner Bros., Snyder had some contact with the team at Bottlerocket, sharing some of their early ideas as they were forming, like some of the alterations to the story that he intended to make in his movie. One of these planned divergences from the source material would actually form the basis for one of Bottlerocket's proposed Watchmen video games. The original Watchmen comics reference the shooting of John F. Kennedy, and some readers have since inferred that it might have been the comedian who was behind it, although this was never outright confirmed to be true. On the other hand, in Zack Snyder's take on the series, he decided to explicitly show the comedian perpetrating his assassination in the film's opening. This was one of the earlier ideas for the movie that was shared with Bottlerocket. They then came up with the concept of doing a video game which would have had the player carrying out various capers connected to significant events in history as the Watchmen. For instance, you would have had a mission in which the player, as the comedian, murders JFK before successfully fleeing the scene. Had the game been made, you would have played as other members of the Watchmen too, such as Night Owl and Rorschach. The developers essentially wanted to do an action-packed character exploration, examining how their participation in major events in history affected them during their years as superheroes. All of it would have taken place before the main events of the movie, and would have been designed to highlight the revolutions as characters along the way. Every level was supposed to expand upon an event that was briefly shown or referenced in the comics. An example of this are the riots which occur before the Keen Act is passed to put a stop to costumed vigilantes. This was only ever shown across a couple of pages in the comics, where we see Night Owl and the comedian attempt to intervene and quell the violence, but the developers wanted to make it into a larger storyline. Their intention was to cut between their three playable characters in one level, Rorschach, Night Owl, and the comedian, showing how they responded to the crisis. Each chapter was supposed to employ various different perspectives and gameplay types for maximum cinematic effect. For instance, they wanted to do a section set during the Vietnam War, where you would have played as the comedian slaughtering soldiers on the battlefield. This part was intended to play out as a Call of Duty style first-person shooter. However, each playable character was also meant to have a standard style of gameplay that was unique to them. Rorschach's was set to be heavily stealth-based. He would sneak about, quietly taking down enemies and improvising to weaponize objects in his surroundings. Night Owl's gameplay would have heavily relied on high-tech gadgets and vehicles like his owl ship, while the comedian's would have been a bit less, subtle. He would have employed a combination of his fists and a handful of different guns. Although you would have been restricted to playing as those select 3 members of the Watchmen, other characters like Silk Spectre and Ozymandias were set to have cameos, and the team is still considering how exactly those would be implemented. They did toy with the idea of rendering some of them as AI buddies that would follow you around levels and fight alongside you. An appearance from Dr. Manhattan in the comedian's Vietnam mission was one idea that a developer mentioned to me. The Watchmen in History video game was one of 2 separate concepts that Battlerocket assembled during their time working on Watchmen. Another idea they had was to do a third-person action-adventure game that revolved around Rorschach. It too would have been set years before the film. It would have followed his vigilante adventures as he investigates and solves crimes around New York City. He would use his grappling hook to get about, and could use it to land on top of cars and hijack them. As indicated by mechanics such as these, it was intended to be an open-world style game, but there was never any gameplay prototype made for them to put these ideas into practice. It's possible that it later could have been reduced in scope due to time or budget constraints. Nothing was ever written in stone, as the pitch only existed as concept art, early design documents, and some 3D modelling work. The exact technical details were never worked out. The Rorschach video game would have used a blend of melee combat and more contemplative detective work. Rorschach would have to carefully scrutinise crime scenes for clues, entering an investigation mode to help him piece together what might have unfolded. He would have also been able to question enemies and specific NPCs by using a series of brutal interrogation moves. The fighting mechanics in the game likely would have used a combat system similar to the one featured in the Mark of Kree. The majority of work on Battlerocket's Watchmen pitch was completed between the months of May and July in 2007. In the end, their idea of the Watchmen doing missions linked to historical events became the focal point of their pitch. A few other companies had been trying to sell Warner Brothers and Zack Snyder on their respective visions for possible Watchmen games, but they weren't quite as interested in those. Battlerocket from the beginning was the frontrunner to secure the license. Snyder himself was reportedly ready to choose them. Then an unexpected setback prevented them from moving forward at the last minute. Snyder wasn't 100% satisfied with the contract that Warner had drawn up for Battlerocket and ordered that they revise it. This pushed the expected start of development back by some weeks. At this stage, the developers had been without a new source of income for around half a year. If they didn't secure new work quickly, the company would have to begin laying staff off. Fortunately for them, they had other opportunities waiting for them that could provide them with some much needed immediate financial relief. Brash Entertainment, a new publishing group in Hollywood, had bought the rights to use DC Comics character The Flash in video game form. Being big fans of their work with Sony, Brash was keen for Bottlerocket to helm this new project. When Zack Snyder ordered his Watchmen video game contracts be amended, Brash caught word of Bottlerocket's situation and swiftly stepped in, offering them a deal then and there. The management of Bottlerocket signed with little hesitation. Warner Brothers and Zack Snyder were reportedly less than pleased with the outcome, to say the least. It meant that Bottlerocket could no longer make the video game that they had been trying to sell them on for months, since the Flash project would require most of their resources. It would have been a multi-platform game for consoles, although which ones exactly were never fully decided. Xbox 360, PS3 and Wii were all possibilities. With Bottlerocket's Watchmen game proposal scrapped, the job went to a company called Deadline Games. They'd been pitching an episodic brawler game for PSN and Xbox Live Arcade. Zack Snyder had a reduced role in its development, in contrast with Battlerocket's game, which he was intended to oversee from a distance. Deadline's Watchmen beat-em-up would eventually emerge as Watchmen: The End Is Nigh, which released in 2009. The games received poor reviews, undersold, and ended up being their last project. Deadline had to shut down, filing for bankruptcy only a few months after The End Is Nigh launched. If you've enjoyed this video, please don't forget to subscribe and check out my other videos for more exclusive looks at lost video games. Hit the annotations to see my video on a lost Tron game or a cancelled game based around Marvel's Daredevil. Unseen64 is an archive for cancelled, unreleased and unseen video games. You can visit the site at Unseen64.net. I've been Liam, I hope you found this video to be of interest, and have fun.